911, what's your emergency? Oh God, she's not breathing. The snake, it's still wrapped around her. Please send someone now. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. What's your location? The Reptile Research Center on Highway 42. Julia Banks, the python, it won't let go. There's so much blood. Help is on the way. Is the snake still constricting? I can't tell. I can't get close. Oh God, her face is blue. In the humid confines of the Reptile Research Center in Brooksville, Florida, what should have been another routine Tuesday afternoon feeding would become a nightmare that shook the entire exotic animal community to its core. The date was March 15, 2023, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the facility's skylights, creating an almost peaceful atmosphere that would soon be shattered by screams. Julia Banks was 34 years old, a woman whose entire life had been dedicated to understanding and caring for some of the world's most dangerous reptiles. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches with bright auburn hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail, Julia had the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of handling creatures most people only saw in their nightmares. She had no idea that the 18-foot reticulated python she'd raised from a hatchling would become her executioner. This is Julia Banks's story. A story of passion turned deadly, of warnings ignored, and the moment when a decade of trust was betrayed in the most violent way imaginable. What you're about to hear isn't just another animal attack. It's a cautionary tale about the thin line between expertise and overconfidence, between love for dangerous animals and fatal delusion. You're watching Animal Attack Files, where we bring you the most shocking real-life animal encounters from around the world. If this story grips you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see exotic pet ownership forever. Trust me, after hearing what happened to Julia Banks, you'll never look at a snake the same way again. The Reptile Research Center wasn't just any exotic animal facility. It was Julia's dream made reality, a 10,000 square foot sanctuary housing over 200 species of reptiles, from harmless corn snakes to deadly king cobras. Julia had built her reputation as one of Florida's most skilled snake handlers, someone who could read serpent behavior like others read books. She'd been featured in documentaries, consulted for Hollywood films, and had over 50,000 followers on social media who watched her daily interactions with creatures that would send most people running. But on that March afternoon, something was different. Security footage would later show Julia entering the python enclosure at 2:47 p.m., carrying a white bucket containing 2 thawed rabbits. She was alone, a violation of her own safety protocols. The massive snake, a female named Medusa, was coiled in the corner of her custom-built habitat, appearing to sleep. Julia had fed Medusa hundreds of times over the snake's 8 years of life. This was routine. This was normal. This was safe. Or so Julia thought. What the security cameras captured next would become evidence in the investigation that followed. They showed Julia approaching Medusa with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. They showed her setting down the bucket, reaching for her feeding tongs. They showed Medusa's head beginning to move, tracking Julia's movements with an intensity that experienced handlers would later recognize as predatory focus. They showed the last moments of Julia Banks's life as she knew it. In the coming chapters, you'll learn about the warning signs Julia ignored, the pleas from colleagues she dismissed, and the escalating aggressive behaviors from Medusa that Julia explained away as mood swings. You'll hear from the assistant who made that frantic 911 call, the first responders who faced an impossible situation, and the experts who would later piece together exactly how a beloved snake became a killer. But more than that, you'll discover the tragic truth about Julia Banks, a woman whose greatest strength, her fearlessness around dangerous animals, became her ultimate weakness. Because in the world of exotic animal handling, confidence without caution isn't brave. It's a death sentence waiting to be executed. And on March 15, 2023, that sentence was carried out with brutal efficiency. Julia Banks wasn't just another snake enthusiast who got in over her head. She was a legend in the herpetology community, a woman whose name was spoken with respect and admiration from Miami to Seattle. Born on a sweltering July day in 1988 in rural Georgia, Julia grew up in a double-wide trailer on the outskirts of Valdosta, where the sound of cicadas and the rustle of palmetto bushes were the soundtrack to her childhood. Her fascination with snakes began at age 6 when she found a corn snake hiding under her family's porch and, instead of running away screaming like her older sister did, she gently picked it up and cradled it in her small hands. Her mother, Linda Banks, still recalls that moment with a mixture of pride and dread. Most mothers would have been horrified. Linda would later tell investigators, her voice breaking. But Julia, she looked at that snake like she'd found her purpose in life. She was so gentle, so calm. The snake just relaxed in her hands like it knew she meant no harm. I should have been scared. Maybe I should have discouraged it. But she looked so happy. Julia's father had abandoned the family when she was 3, leaving Linda to raise 2 daughters on a waitress's salary. Money was tight, but Linda scraped together enough to buy Julia her first reptile field guide for her 7th birthday. Julia memorized every page, could identify every species of snake native to Georgia by the time she was 8. Teachers at Valdosta Elementary remember her as the quiet girl who gave a presentation on venomous versus non-venomous snakes that was so detailed, so passionate, that even the principal sat in to watch. By high school, Julia had turned her bedroom into a makeshift serpentarium. She rescued snakes from people's yards, nursed injured reptiles back to health, and spent every penny from her part-time job at Pet Paradise on equipment and education. Her classmates called her Snake Girl, but Julia wore the nickname like a badge of honor. She graduated valedictorian in 2006, her speech themed around following your passion no matter how unconventional it might be. The University of Florida offered her a full scholarship to their zoology program. Julia thrived in Gainesville, double majoring in zoology and business management. Her professors remember her as brilliant but stubborn, someone who would argue passionately if she disagreed with established safety protocols. Dr. Marcus Webb, her herpetology professor, recalls one particular incident that would prove prophetic. Julia challenged me on the 2-person rule for handling large constrictors, he said. She argued that if you knew the animal well enough, if you'd built a relationship, the rule was unnecessarily cautious. I told her that was exactly the kind of thinking that got handlers killed. She just smiled and said, "Not if you really understand them." Julia graduated summa cum laude in 2010 and immediately went to work at the Miami Serpentarium, where she quickly rose from junior handler to lead keeper. It was there she met David Shin, a marine biologist who shared her passion for misunderstood creatures. They married in 2013 in a ceremony where the rings were delivered by a ball python named Cupid. David supported Julia's dream of opening her own facility, even when it meant mortgaging their house and maxing out credit cards to make it happen. The Reptile Research Center opened its doors in 2015. Julia poured everything into it, her savings, her time, her soul. She built relationships with breeders worldwide, rescued animals from inexperienced owners, and created educational programs that reached thousands of students. Her YouTube channel, Julia's Reptile Room, exploded in popularity. Videos of her free-handling venomous snakes and swimming with anacondas regularly got millions of views. She became the go-to expert for National Geographic and Discovery Channel whenever they needed someone who could make snakes seem approachable, even lovable. But success bred overconfidence. Colleagues noticed changes in Julia's handling practices around 2020. She started taking shortcuts, dismissing safety protocols as paranoid nonsense. When veteran handler Tom Rodriguez confronted her about entering enclosures alone, Julia laughed it. "Tom, I've been doing this for 15 years. These snakes are my babies. They would never hurt me." Tom's response was chilling in hindsight. "Julia, that's exactly what every dead snake handler thought right before they died. Julia's relationship with Medusa was particularly intense. She'd acquired the reticulated python as a 2-foot hatchling in 2015, a rescue from a drug dealer's apartment where the snake had been severely malnourished. Julia nursed Medusa back to health, spent countless hours with her, and featured her in dozens of videos. In Julia's mind, she hadn't just saved Medusa, they'd bonded. She'd tell visitors that Medusa recognized her voice, that they had a connection beyond handler and animal. Friends and family saw a woman at the peak of her career. Julia had published 2 books, The Secret Life of Serpents and Confessions of a Snake Charmer, both bestsellers in their niche. She was consulting for a major Hollywood film about snake handlers. She just signed a deal for her own television series. At 34, Julia Banks had everything she'd ever dreamed of. But those closest to her also saw the warning signs. David noticed she'd stopped wearing protective gear. Her sister Sarah begged her to hire more staff after finding Julia passed out from exhaustion in Medusa's enclosure, the massive python coiled peacefully beside her. Her mother had nightmares about snakes, dreams where Julia disappeared into a massive serpent's coils and never came back. She believed she was special. Her assistant Maria Gonzalez would later testify, tears streaming down her face. Julia thought the rules didn't apply to her because she understood snakes in a way nobody else did. She'd say things like, "Medusa would never hurt me. She loves me." Try to tell her that snakes don't love. They tolerate. But Julia, she couldn't see the difference anymore. Reticulated pythons are nature's perfect killing machines, a fact that Julia Banks understood intellectually but had somehow forgotten emotionally. Native to Southeast Asia, these serpents are the world's longest snakes, with females capable of reaching lengths exceeding 20 feet and weighing over 200 pounds. In the wild, they're apex predators, capable of taking down prey as large as deer, pigs, and even the occasional human. The method is horrifyingly efficient: ambush, constrict, asphyxiate, consume. A reticulated python can exert over 90 psi of pressure per square inch, enough to stop blood flow to the brain in seconds and crush ribs like twigs. The python that would change Julia's life forever was exceptional even by reticulated standards. Medusa, named ironically after the Greek monster who turned men to stone, was 18 feet of pure muscle wrapped in an intricate pattern of gold, brown, and black diamonds. She weighed 140 pounds on her last recorded weigh-in, though staff suspected she'd gained more. Her head was the size of a football, equipped with over 100 backward-facing teeth designed to grip struggling prey. Her jaw could unhinge to swallow animals wider than her own body. She was, in every sense, a masterpiece of evolution's darker impulses. Medusa's origin story read like a crime thriller. In January 2015, Miami-Dade police raided a Liberty City crack house and found her stuffed in a glass tank barely larger than a bathtub. She was 6 feet long but weighed only 8 pounds, severely underweight for her size. The dealer who owned her had been feeding her live rats once a month if he remembered, using her as an intimidation tool for clients who owed him money. When animal control couldn't find a facility willing to take a sick python with an aggressive reputation, Julia volunteered immediately. "I'll never forget the first time I saw her," Julia had written in her journal, entries that would later be evidence. She was so thin you could count every rib, her eyes were clouded with retained shed, and she struck at everything that moved. But when I opened her transport container, she looked at me, really looked at me, and I swear I saw intelligence there. Not love, maybe, but understanding. Like she knew I was there to help. For 6 months, Julia dedicated herself to Medusa's recovery. She treated the snake's respiratory infection, carefully increased her feeding schedule, and spent hours sitting beside her enclosure, talking softly, letting Medusa grow accustomed to her presence. By July 2015, Medusa had reached a healthy weight and shed properly for the first time in who knows how long. The transformation was remarkable, and Julia documented every step on her growing YouTube channel. The early years were what Julia would later call their honeymoon period. Medusa seemed to tolerate, even seek out, Julia's presence. Videos from 2016 show Julia confidently entering Medusa's enclosure, the massive snake barely acknowledging her presence. In one viral video with 3.2 million views, Julia sat reading a book while Medusa draped across her lap like a scaly blanket. The caption read, "Just another day at the office. With my best girl." But snakes aren't dogs. They don't form emotional bonds. What Julia interpreted as affection, experts would later identify as habituation. Medusa had simply learned that Julia meant food and warmth, nothing more. Dr. Ricardo Morales, a herpetologist with 40 years of experience, reviewed Julia's videos during the investigation. His assessment was blunt. "What I see is a large predator that has learned to associate a specific human with regular feeding. That's not friendship. That's conditioning. And conditioning can be overridden by instinct in a heartbeat." The first warning sign came in September 2021. Security footage showed Medusa striking at the glass when Julia walked past her enclosure. The lazy, half-hearted strikes of a snake wanting attention, but full-force impacts that left the handler visibly shaken. Julia's notes from that day were revealing. Medusa seemed agitated today. Probably pre-shed. Gave her space. But Medusa hadn't been in pre-shed. She'd been displaying what experts call cage aggression, a sign that captivity stress was building. October brought another incident. Maria Gonzalez was helping Julia clean Medusa's enclosure when the snake suddenly positioned herself in an S-curve, classic strike position. Julia just laughed, Maria recalled. She said Medusa was playing. "But I've been around snakes my whole life. That wasn't play. That was a threat display. I refused to go back in that enclosure without backup after that." By December, Medusa's behavior had shifted dramatically. She stopped eating regularly, would only accept food from Julia, and became increasingly aggressive toward other staff members. Tom Rodriguez documented 17 separate incidents where Medusa displayed predatory behavior toward humans between December 2021 and March 2023. Each time, Julia had an explanation. Medusa was stressed, hormonal, needed bigger prey, needed more handling, needed less handling. The excuses piled up like warning flags in a hurricane. Dr. Amanda Foster, an animal behaviorist brought in for consultation in January 2023, spent 3 days observing Medusa. Her report was damning. This animal displays clear signs of size-related aggression common in large female reticulated pythons. She has begun viewing humans, particularly smaller humans like Ms. Banks, as potential prey items. Recommend immediate implementation of two-person protocol and consideration of chemical restraint for all interactions. Julia's response to the report was found in her email drafts, never sent. These so-called experts don't understand the relationship Medusa and I have built over 8 years. Yes, she's going through changes, but abandoning her now would be cruel. She trusts me. I won't betray that trust with unnecessary fear-mongering protocols. The Reptile Research Center's layout made the situation worse. Medusa's enclosure was in the back of the facility, isolated from the main traffic areas. It was a custom-built room, 20 by 15 feet, with climbing structures, a large soaking pool, and heat gradients that perfectly mimicked her natural habitat. Julia had designed it herself, calling it Medusa's Palace. But palaces can become prisons, and prisoners can become desperate. Staff meetings from early 2023 revealed growing concern. Meeting notes from February 7th show heated discussions about safety protocols. 3 handlers threatened to quit if Julia continued entering large snake enclosures alone. Julia's response, according to the minutes, "This facility was built on trust between human and animal. If we operate from a place of fear, we've already failed. I've been handling dangerous snakes since before some of you were born. I know what I'm doing." But did she? Dr. Webb, her old professor, visited the facility in late February 2023. What he saw horrified him. Julia was free-handling Medusa with no backup, no hook, no barriers. When I expressed concern, she demonstrated how calm Medusa was by draping the snake around her shoulders and walking around the room. I've never been more terrified in my life. That snake was tracking my every movement with laser focus. That's not a pet. That's a predator allowing you to live. The final weeks before the attack saw an escalation in Medusa's concerning behaviors. She began refusing pre-killed prey, holding out for days. Until Julia would cave and offer her live rabbits, a practice Julia had previously condemned as unnecessarily dangerous. Medusa started positioning herself near the enclosure door whenever staff approached, her massive head tracking movement with unnerving intensity. Stopped using her hide boxes, instead remaining in open areas where she could monitor the entire room. On March 10th, just 5 days before the attack, Medusa did something that should have been the final warning. During a routine feeding, she struck at Julia's hand instead of the rabbit, missing by mere inches. The strike was so powerful it knocked Julia backward. Security footage shows Julia sitting on the floor, staring at Medusa, who remained in strike position for nearly 30 seconds before slowly retreating. Julia never documented this incident. She never told anyone. She got up, completed the feeding, and went about her day as if her 8-year relationship with Medusa hadn't just fundamentally changed. Because it had. Medusa was no longer seeing Julia Banks as her caretaker. She was seeing her as prey. In the 3 weeks leading up to March 15, 2023, the Reptile Research Center became a powder keg of tension waiting for a spark. Julia Banks, once known for her methodical approach to animal husbandry, began displaying what colleagues would later describe as reckless disregard for basic safety. The woman who had written extensively about respecting the wild nature of captive animals seemed to have forgotten her own teachings, replacing caution with a dangerous cocktail of familiarity and denial. The changes were subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. On February 24th, Dr. Marcus Webb returned for a follow-up visit, bringing with him Dr. Patricia Hemsworth, one of the world's foremost experts on python behavior. What they witnessed during their inspection would later form the backbone of the facility's safety violation report. They found Julia hand-feeding Medusa without any protective equipment, her bare arms, within easy striking distance of the massive python's head. When Dr. Hemsworth expressed alarm, Julia's response was dismissive, almost contemptuous. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern, but Medusa and I have an understanding. She takes food from my hand like a puppy. Watch." The demonstration that followed made both experts physically recoil. Julia dangled a thawed rabbit mere inches from Medusa's mouth, her hand so close that the snake's tongue flicked against her skin. Medusa's pupils were dilated, her body coiled in what any experienced handler would recognize as a pre-strike position. "That snake is going to kill you," Dr. Hemsworth stated flatly, her report later revealed. "This isn't anthropomorphism anymore, Julia. This is suicidal behavior." Julia actually laughed, and replied, "You've been in academics too long, Patricia. Real handlers know the difference between aggression and anticipation. Medusa's just excited for dinner." The inspection ended with Dr. Hemsworth recommending immediate suspension of Julia's handling privileges pending psychological evaluation. The recommendation was never implemented. Maria Gonzalez, Julia's assistant for 3 years, began documenting her concerns in a private journal, entries that would later provide crucial timeline evidence. February 26th, Julia spent 4 hours in Medusa's enclosure today. Found her asleep against the back wall with Medusa coiled around her legs. When I woke her up, she said she'd just been resting her eyes. This is insane. February 28th, caught Julia hand feeding Medusa again. When I offered to get the feeding tongs, she said, "Medusa prefers the personal touch. I can't watch this anymore." March 3rd. Julia's lost weight. David called asking if she's been eating lunch. She hasn't. She spends every break with Medusa. David Chen, Julia's husband, was watching his wife disappear into an obsession he couldn't understand. Their marriage, once built on shared passion for wildlife, had become strained to the breaking point. She'd come home talking about Medusa like she was a person, David would later tell investigators, his voice hollow with grief. Not just anthropomorphizing, but actually believing this snake had human emotions, human loyalty. I tried to remind her of her own writings about the dangers of projection with predators. She accused me of being jealous. Jealous of a snake. The staff meetings during this period became battlegrounds. Tom Rodriguez, the senior handler who'd worked with Julia since the facility's opening, led what he called an intervention. On March 5th, 7 staff members confronted Julia about her increasingly dangerous behavior. The meeting, recorded as per facility protocol, captured the desperation in their voices. "Julia, we're scared," said Jennifer Walsh, a junior handler. "Not just for you, but for all of us. If something happens to you in there, we're the ones who have to go in and get you out. How are we supposed to extract you from an 18-foot python?" Julia's response revealed the depth of her delusion. "Nothing is going to happen because Medusa would never hurt me. You all see a dangerous. I see a misunderstood animal who's finally found someone who truly understands her. If you can't see that, maybe you're in the wrong profession." 3 staff members submitted their resignations that day. The security footage from March 7th through March 14th tells a story of escalating risk. Julia began entering Medusa's enclosure at odd hours, 5 a.m. before the facility opened, 10 p.m. after everyone had left. She disabled the 2-person protocol alarm on Medusa's door, a safety feature she herself had insisted on installing. On March 9th, cameras captured her lying flat on the enclosure floor, allowing Medusa to slither over her entire body, the snake's weight pressing her into the substrate. At one point, Medusa paused with her massive head hovering inches from Julia's face, tongue flicking rapidly. Julia didn't move for 47 minutes. Dr. James Morrison, a psychologist specializing in human-animal relationships, reviewed Julia's social media posts from this period during the investigation. His analysis was disturbing. Ms. Banks displayed classic signs of what we call predator worship syndrome, where handlers begin to view dangerous animals as mystical or spiritually superior beings. Her posts increasingly described Medusa in religious terms: communion, transcendence, becoming one. This is textbook detachment from reality. March 11th brought what should have been the final wake-up call. Medusa refused her scheduled feeding, the 4th time in 6 weeks. Julia entered with food. The python positioned herself in a perfect ambush position, head low, neck in a striking S-curve, body tensed. Instead of recognizing danger, Julia interpreted this as playfulness. She posted a photo to Instagram showing Medusa in this position with the caption, "Someone's feeling sassy today. Look at that perfect strike pose. Don't worry, followers, she's just showing off for the camera. #snakelove. #MedusaMyMuse. #PythonPerfection." The comments section exploded with warnings from experienced handlers worldwide. Robert Stevenson, who'd handled pythons for 30 years, wrote, "Julia, please listen. That's not a pose. That's pre-strike behavior. That animal is sizing you up." Dr. Hemsworth commented, "This is deeply concerning. Please implement proper safety protocols immediately." Even celebrity handler Jake Morrison, known for his own risky behavior, expressed alarm. "Julia, I've pushed limits too, but this is beyond dangerous. That snake is hunting you." Julia responded to exactly one comment from a follower praising her bravery. "Thank you. So many people let fear control their relationships with these magnificent creatures. Medusa and I have transcended that. We operate on pure trust." The physical changes in Medusa during this period were documented by staff and visible in photos. Her girth had increased noticeably despite refusing meals, suggesting she was retaining weight in preparation for a large feeding. Her scales showed a subtle dulling that experienced handlers recognize as pre-shed condition, though she wasn't due to shed for weeks. Most tellingly, her movement patterns had changed. Instead of her usual lazy, contented movements, she displayed what handlers call active hunting behavior, constant tongue flicking, head tracking all movement, and positioning herself in ambush locations within her enclosure. On March 13, 2 days before the attack, Julia's mother Linda visited the facility. She hadn't seen her daughter in months and was shocked by what she found. Julia looked exhausted, almost manic, Linda recalled. She insisted on showing me Medusa, kept talking about their connection. When we got to the enclosure, that snake fixated on Julia like my cat watches birds. It was horrible. I begged her to be careful. She hugged me and said, "Mom, Medusa loves me. Love doesn't hurt." The final staff meeting before the attack, held on March 14 at 4 p.m., devolved into chaos. Tom Rodriguez issued an ultimatum: either Julia agreed to follow safety protocols, or he would report the facility to Florida Fish and Wildlife. Julia's response was to fire him on the spot. "If you can't support the mission of this facility, which is to show that humans and predators can coexist peacefully, then you don't belong here," she declared. Tom cleaned out his locker and left, but not before making one last attempt. "Julia, I've known you for 8 years. You're not yourself. Please don't go in that enclosure alone anymore. Please." Julia turned her back on him. That night, David Chin made his own desperate attempt to reach his wife. He found her in her office, watching footage of Medusa on multiple monitors. She was taking notes about the snake's movement patterns, convinced she was documenting some new form of snake intelligence. David said, "I told her I was scared. Told her I couldn't sleep, worried I'd get a call saying she was dead. She looked at me with such pity and said, 'You'll understand someday. Medusa and I are proving that love transcends species.' That's when I knew I'd lost her. Not to another person, but to an 18-foot snake." The morning of March 15 dawned clear and humid, typical for Central Florida in spring. Julia arrived at the facility at 7 a.m., 2 hours before opening. Security footage shows her moving with unusual energy, almost excitement. She checked on other animals perfunctorily, her attention clearly focused on reaching Medusa's enclosure. At 7:47 a.m., she posted what would be her final Instagram story, a video of Medusa seemingly watching her through the glass, with Julia's voiceover saying, "Good morning, beautiful girl. Ready for breakfast? I've got your favorite extra large rabbits. Today feels special, doesn't it?" It was special. It was the day Medusa had been patiently waiting for. The day 8 years of conditioning would culminate in nature's oldest drama, predator versus prey. And Julia Banks, blinded by a love that never existed, walked willingly into the role of victim. Tuesday, March 15, 2023, 2:15 p.m. The Central Florida sun blazed overhead, pushing the temperature to a humid 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the Reptile Research Center, the climate control system maintained a steady 78 degrees in the main building, but Medusa's enclosure was kept warmer, 85 degrees with 70% humidity, perfectly mimicking the Southeast Asian rainforests where reticulated pythons evolved to become apex predators. Julia Banks stood in the prep room, methodically thawing 2 large rabbits in warm water, humming a tune that surveillance audio would later identify as Blackbird by the Beatles. She seemed relaxed, even cheerful, completely unaware that she had less than 35 minutes to live. The rabbits Julia had selected were larger than usual, 5 pounds each instead of the standard 3-pound feeders she'd noted in the feeding log that morning. Medusa refused last 2 feedings, trying larger prey items to stimulate appetite. She's been lethargic lately, probably just going through a phase. What Julia interpreted as lethargy, experts would later recognize as calculated energy conservation. Medusa hadn't been disinterested in food, she'd been waiting for larger prey to present itself. At 2:27 p.m., Julia entered the staff break room where Maria Gonzalez was finishing her lunch. Security cameras captured their final conversation. "Hey Maria, I'm about to feed Medusa. She's been fussy lately, so I'm going to spend some time with her, maybe figure out what's wrong." Maria looked up from her sandwich, concern evident on her face. "Do you want me to come with you? You know, just in case." Julia's laugh was light, dismissive. "Maria, come on. It's Medusa. She probably just needs some attention. I'll be fine. Besides, you know she gets nervous with multiple people during feeding time." It was a lie. Medusa had never shown anxiety with multiple handlers present. If anything, witnesses made her more cautious, less likely to display aggressive behavior. Maria would later testify that something felt wrong about that interaction. Julia seemed almost excited, like she was going on a date or something. She kept checking her watch, fidgeting with her hair. "I should have insisted on going with her. I should have." The guilt in Maria's voice would never fully fade. At 2:34 p.m., Julia swiped her keycard at the door to the restricted reptile wing. The electronic log recorded her entry, the same system that would later show no one else entered that wing until Maria's frantic arrival at 3:09 p.m. Julia walked down the familiar hallway, past the enclosures of smaller pythons and boas, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. She stopped briefly at the enclosure of Magnus, a 12-foot Burmese python, tapping on the glass and cooing, "Hey, handsome. Auntie Julia will check on you later." Magnus, deep in digestive torpor from a recent feeding, didn't respond. Medusa's enclosure was at the end of the hall, behind a heavy door marked with warnings in red: "Danger, large constrictor. 2-person. Protocol required. No entry without proper equipment." Julia had designed those signs herself, had insisted on their placement. She walked past them without a glance, her keycard overriding the 2-person protocol alert that should have sounded. She'd disabled it 3 weeks earlier, telling the security company it was malfunctioning. At 2:37 p.m., Julia entered the anteroom of Medusa's enclosure. This small space served as an airlock of sorts, designed to prevent escape and give handlers a moment to assess the animal's position and behavior before entering. Through the reinforced glass window, Julia could see Medusa, coiled in the far corner of her enclosure, apparently asleep. The massive python's sides rose and fell with slow, rhythmic breathing. Her position seemed relaxed, non-threatening. Julia had seen Medusa like this hundreds of times before. But something was different. Medusa's head, usually tucked under her coils during rest, was positioned outward, angled toward the door. Her eyes, which should have been clouded with sleep, were clear and focused. Most tellingly, her body, while appearing relaxed, showed subtle muscle tension that an experienced handler should have recognized. Medusa wasn't sleeping. She was waiting. Julia spent 3 minutes in the anteroom, preparing the feeding tongs and arranging the rabbits on the feeding tray. The security camera in this room showed her movements were routine, practiced. She checked her phone briefly. Investigators would later find she'd been reading comments on her morning Instagram post. One comment from a follower named Trevor stood out. "Julia, please be careful. That snake's body language in your recent videos is concerning. I've kept Reddix for 20 years and Medusa is displaying textbook food-seeking behavior toward you." Julia had typed a response but never sent it. "Thanks for the concern, Trevor, but Medusa and I have a special." At 2:41 p.m., Julia set her phone aside and picked up the feeding tray. She took a deep breath, visible on camera, and smiled. "Okay, beautiful girl," she said aloud, though no one else was present. "Let's see if we can get you eating again." She unlocked the inner door with her keycard and stepped into Medusa's domain. The enclosure was Julia's masterpiece of habitat design. 20 feet by 15 feet, with a 12-foot ceiling, it featured artificial trees for climbing, a large soaking pool with circulating water, and multiple hide boxes crafted to look like hollow logs. The substrate was a deep layer of cypress mulch that held humidity well and allowed for natural burrowing behavior. Heat lamps created temperature gradients from 88 degrees in the basking spots to 78 degrees in the cooler corners. It was paradise for a python, a space where a 140-pound predator could move freely and express natural behaviors. Julia entered with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She didn't carry a hook, the long tool handlers use to control snake movement. She didn't wear protective sleeves or even gloves. She walked in carrying the feeding tray like a waitress bringing dinner to a favored customer. "Hey, my beautiful girl," she called out softly. "Mama's got your favorite. Extra big today, just how you like them." Medusa didn't move. Not immediately. Her massive body remained coiled, but surveillance footage enhanced during the investigation showed subtle changes. Her breathing rate increased from 6 breaths per minute to 12. Her tongue, which had been still, began flicking rapidly, tasting the air, gathering chemical information. Most significantly, her pupils dilated despite the bright lighting, a physiological response to anticipation of feeding. Julia approached slowly, still talking in the sing-song voice she reserved for Medusa. "I know you've been grumpy lately. Probably just the season change, right? Spring makes everyone a little crazy." She set the feeding tray on a wooden platform about 6 feet from Medusa's position and picked up the tongs. The first rabbit dangled from the metal grip, swaying slightly. "Look what I have. Yummy bunny. Come on, sweetness. You're hungry." At 2:44 p.m., Medusa began to move. Her head rose first, a slow, fluid motion that brought it level with Julia's waist. Her neck followed, creating the characteristic S-curve of a python preparing to strike. But she didn't strike. Not yet. Instead, she began a behavior that Dr. Morales would later describe as textbook hunting sequence for large prey. She moved laterally, keeping her head oriented toward Julia but slowly circling to the left, forcing Julia to turn to keep facing her. Julia, misreading this as interest in the food, extended the tongs further. "That's it, baby. Come get your dinner." She took a step backward, trying to lead Medusa toward the feeding platform. But Medusa wasn't following the rabbit. Security footage clearly shows her head tracking Julia's center mass, not the dangling prey. Her tongue flicked constantly now, and her body began to bunch behind her head, coiling energy for an explosive strike. "Come on, Medusa." Julia's voice carried a note of confusion. "You always love Rabbit Day." She waved the tongs, making the rabbit dance. Enticingly, Medusa's head swayed slightly, not following the rabbit but maintaining target lock on Julia's torso. The python had made her choice. The 5-pound rabbit was insignificant compared to the 120-pound prey standing before her. At 2:46 p.m., witness testimony from the main building becomes relevant. Jennifer Walsh, working in the adjoining mammal section, heard Julia's voice through the ventilation system. She was talking to the snake like normal, but then her tone changed. She sounded not scared exactly, but confused. She kept saying, "Medusa, what are you doing? Hey, look at the rabbit. Look at the food." Jennifer didn't think much of it at the time. Snakes could be fussy eaters, and Julia was known for her patience with difficult feeders. Inside the enclosure, Julia had backed up against the artificial rock wall. Medusa had successfully maneuvered her into a corner, cutting off easy access to the door. The python was now less than 4 feet away, her head at Julia's chest level, body compressed into tight coils. Julia finally seemed to recognize something was wrong. The feeding tongs trembled in her grip. "Medusa, easy girl. What's gotten into you?" She tried to sidestep along the wall, but Medusa moved with her, maintaining the same distance, the same predatory focus. At 2:47 p.m. and 23 seconds, Julia made a fatal error. Realizing Medusa wasn't interested in the rabbit, she lowered the feeding tongs, bringing her arms down to her sides in a gesture of confusion or surrender. For one crucial second, her guard was completely dropped. Her vital organs, heart, lungs, throat, were exposed and unprotected. Medusa had been waiting 8 years for this moment. And she didn't hesitate. At 2:47 p.m. and 24 seconds, Medusa struck with the explosive power that makes reticulated pythons one of nature's most efficient killers. The security camera captured the moment in horrifying clarity, 140 pounds of pure muscle uncoiling like a released spring, covering the forefoot. Distance in less than a third of a second. Julia had no time to react, no chance to defend herself. Medusa's gaping mouth, displaying rows of needle-sharp teeth, connected with Julia's left shoulder and upper chest, the impact driving her backward into the enclosure wall with such force that her head snapped back, stunning her momentarily. Julia's scream, captured by the enclosure's audio system, was cut short as Medusa's teeth sank deep into muscle tissue, anchoring the python's head while her body began its deadly work. Within 2 seconds, the first coil wrapped around Julia's torso, just below her ribcage. The feeding tongs clattered to the floor, the rabbit still attached, forgotten and irrelevant. Julia's hands instinctively went to Medusa's head, trying to pry those jaws loose, but she might as well have been trying to bend steel. Each of Medusa's 100+ teeth curved backward, designed by evolution to prevent prey from pulling free. No, Medusa, no, please. Julia's voice, high with panic and disbelief, echoed through the enclosure. Her words revealed the depth of her shock. Even as those massive coils began to envelop her, some part of Julia's mind refused to accept that her beloved Medusa had turned on her. Wasn't calling for help, wasn't screaming in rage or fear. She was pleading with the snake as if it could understand, as if 8 years of imagined friendship meant anything to a predator in full hunting mode. The second coil wrapped higher, encircling Julia's chest at the level of her lungs. Dr. Morrison would later explain the biomechanics of constriction. Each time the victim exhales, the snake tightens its grip. It's not crushing in the dramatic sense people imagine. It's a gradual, inexorable compression that prevents the lungs from re-expanding. Death comes from asphyxiation and cardiac arrest as blood flow to the heart is restricted. Julia, who had written extensively about python feeding behavior, surely understood what was happening to her body. The knowledge must have made it infinitely worse. Jennifer Walsh, in the adjoining section, heard the commotion through the ventilation system. At first, I thought maybe Julia had dropped something. There was a bang, like someone hitting the wall. Then I heard her voice, but it sounded wrong. Breathless. She was saying over and over, but each time it got quieter. Jennifer's first thought wasn't that Julia was being attacked. The idea was too impossible. She assumed Julia might be having some kind of medical episode. Inside the enclosure, Medusa methodically continued her killing sequence. The third coil wrapped around Julia's upper chest and shoulders, pinning her left arm to her side. Her right arm remained free, and she used it to strike at Medusa's head, her fists bouncing harmlessly off scales. Evolved to withstand the claws and teeth of desperate prey. Julia's breathing was already labored, each exhalation followed by less and less inhalation as Medusa's coils compressed inexorably tighter. The camera footage showed Julia's legs buckle at 2:48 p.m., her body sliding down the wall as Medusa's weight, 140 pounds of concentrated muscle, bore down on her. The python adjusted smoothly, maintaining her grip while allowing gravity to assist in bringing her prey to the ground. Julia landed hard on her right side, her free arm trapped beneath her body. She was now completely helpless, wrapped from shoulders to hips in scales that might as well have been iron bands. Help, Julia managed to gasp, the word barely audible on the audio recording. The prideful woman who had disabled safety protocols, who had fired staff for questioning her judgment, was finally calling for the help she had rejected. But her voice couldn't carry beyond the enclosure's soundproofed walls. The ventilation system that allowed Jennifer to hear muffled sounds wasn't designed to transmit clear cries for help. Julia was alone with the creature she had claimed to love and trust above all others. Medusa, displaying the patient efficiency of her species, began the behavior known as checking for heartbeat. Reticulated pythons have heat, sensitive pits along their jaws that can detect the warmth of blood flow. They also sense vibrations through their bodies. Medusa positioned her head near Julia's chest, monitoring the increasingly rapid, increasingly weak heartbeat of her prey. She would maintain her constriction until that heartbeat stopped. It was nothing personal. It was simply nature. At 2:49 p.m., Maria Gonzalez finished washing her lunch dishes and decided to check on Julia despite being told not to. Something just felt wrong, she would later testify. Julia had been in there too long for a simple feeding. And the way she'd looked earlier, I just had a bad feeling. Maria walked toward the restricted wing, unaware that her decision to check would mean the difference between a rescue attempt and simply finding a body. Inside the enclosure, Julia's struggle was weakening. The security footage showed her right hand, the only part of her still capable of movement, clawing weakly at the substrate, fingers digging into the cypress mulch in a futile attempt to find leverage, to pull herself free. Her face, visible in profile to the camera, had taken on a dusky purple hue as oxygen deprivation set in. Her eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, stared at the enclosure door just 15 feet away. 15 feet that might as well have been 15 miles. Medusa adjusted her grip, a slight repositioning that drew a strangled sound from Julia, not quite a scream, more a desperate wheeze as the last air in her lungs was forced out. The python's massive head moved to hover directly over Julia's face, and for a moment, woman and snake stared at each other. What Julia saw in those amber eyes, we'll never know. But witnesses who've survived python attacks report a chilling emptiness, a complete absence of malice or emotion. Just the cold calculation of a predator processing prey. At 2:50 p.m., Maria swiped her keycard at the restricted wing door. She walked quickly down the hallway, her unease growing with each step. The silence was oppressive. Usually, she could hear Julia talking to the animals, the sound of enclosure doors opening and closing, the general bustle of animal care. But now there was nothing. She passed Magnus' enclosure, noted the Burmese python hadn't moved, and continued toward Medusa's domain. Inside the enclosure, Julia's movements had ceased except for tiny tremors in her fingers. The security footage timestamp showed 2 hours 50 minutes and 47 seconds when her hand finally went still. But Medusa didn't release her grip. Pythons are patient hunters, often maintaining constriction for up to an hour after prey stops moving, ensuring their meal is truly dead. Medusa settled into a waiting game she had played countless times before with rabbits and chickens. Only this time, her prey wore a Reptile Research Center t-shirt and a wedding ring. Maria reached Medusa's anteroom at 2:51 p.m. Through the small window, she could see into the enclosure, but Medusa and Julia were in the back corner, partially obscured by one of the artificial trees. Maria could see movement, could tell Medusa was active, but couldn't immediately make out what was happening. She pressed closer to the glass, cupping her hands around her eyes to reduce glare. That's when she saw a human foot, still wearing a pink Converse sneaker, protruding from behind the tree. The foot wasn't moving. Oh my God! Oh my God! Maria's scream echoed through the empty hallway. She fumbled for her keycard, hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to swipe it correctly. The inner door's lock disengaged with a soft click, but Maria hesitated. Protocol was clear: never enter a large constrictor enclosure alone, especially during a feeding incident. But Julia was in there. Julia might still be alive. Every second counted. Maria grabbed the emergency hook from the wall rack and yanked open the door. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Julia lay motionless on the enclosure floor, her body wrapped in Medusa's coils from shoulders to hips. Her face was purple-blue, eyes open but unseeing, staring at nothing. Her right arm extended awkwardly from beneath her body, fingers curled as if grasping for something that wasn't there. Medusa, beautiful, terrible Medusa, lay across her like a living shroud, massive head still positioned over Julia's chest, monitoring for any signs of life. Julia! Julia! Maria screamed, raising the hook defensively. Medusa's head swiveled toward her, tongue flicking, assessing this new presence. A terrifying moment. Maria thought the python might release Julia and come for her. But Medusa had expended enormous energy subduing her. She wasn't about to abandon it for a new target. The snake's amber eyes regarded Maria with what seemed like mild annoyance, then returned to monitoring Julia. Maria's 911 call began at 2:52 p.m. The recording captured her hysteria, her desperate attempts to convey the situation to a dispatcher who initially couldn't comprehend what she was saying. A snake attack? Someone get bitten? No, not bitten. She's wrapped up. The python is crushing her. She's not breathing. Oh God, her face is blue. Please, send help now. While staying on the line with 911, Maria made the agonizing decision to attempt a rescue. She knew the risks. A constricting python could easily take a second victim. But Julia had been without oxygen for at least 5 minutes. Brain death begins after 4 minutes without air. There was any chance, any hope at all, Maria had to act. I'm going to try to get her free, Maria told the dispatcher. Ma'am, wait for emergency services. But Maria had already dropped the phone, leaving the line open to record what happened next. She approached slowly, hook extended, trying to remember her training. Never attack the head, that will make the snake grip tighter. Work from the tail, unwinding the coils. But Medusa's tail was wrapped beneath Julia's body. Inaccessible. Maria tried prodding Medusa's mid-body with the hook, hoping to annoy the snake into moving. Medusa's response was to tighten her coils slightly, drawing a wet, crackling sound from Julia's chest that made Maria sob. She tried again, harder this time, actually striking the python's body. Medusa hissed, a long, loud expulsion of air that sounded like a steam engine. But she didn't release her prey. The timestamp read 2:54 p.m. when Maria made her final, desperate attempt. Abandoning caution, she grabbed Medusa's tail with both hands and pulled with all her strength. For a moment, the snake's grip loosened slightly, and Maria heard something that gave her hope, a tiny, gasping sound from Julia. She was still alive, somehow, impossibly, still clinging to life. But Medusa, feeling her prey being stolen, responded with crushing finality. Her coils contracted with such force that Maria heard ribs crack like dry kindling. Julia's body convulsed once, then went completely limp. It was over. Medusa had won. And Maria Gonzalez, sobbing hysterically, could only stand there with a useless hook in her hands, watching the snake that Julia had loved slowly, methodically, begin to reposition her prey for swallowing. At 2:56 p.m., the first sirens wailed down Highway 42, a convoy of emergency vehicles racing toward the Reptile Research Center. The 911 dispatcher had done her job well, communicating the unusual and critical nature of the emergency. Brooksville Fire Rescue Engine 12 led the charge, followed closely by 2 ambulances and 3 Hernando County Sheriff's deputies. Behind them, alerted by dispatch, came the one vehicle that might make a difference, Animal Control Unit 7, equipped with specialized equipment for dangerous animal extraction. Lieutenant James Crawford, a 15-year veteran paramedic, was first through the door at 2:59 p.m. Maria Gonzalez met them in the lobby, hysterical, and covered in cypress mulch from the enclosure floor. Back there, the python. She's wrapped up. Julia's not breathing. Crawford's team had drilled for many scenarios, but a constrictor attack wasn't one of them. He grabbed his trauma kit and followed Maria's frantic gestures toward the restricted wing, speaking rapidly into his radio. Dispatch, confirm we have a Code 3 animal attack. Victim is non-responsive with a large snake involved. Requesting immediate wildlife officer backup. The journey down that hallway felt endless. Crawford would later describe it as surreal, the pristine facility with its educational posters about snake safety, the calm gurgling of filtration systems, all contrasting with Maria's sobbing and the urgency of their footsteps. They burst into Medusa's anteroom at 3:01 p.m., and Crawford's first glimpse through the window stopped him cold. Jesus Christ, he muttered, then keyed his radio again. All units, we have a confirmed constrictor attack with victims still in the snake's possession. I need all available personnel and animal control here now. Deputy Sheriff Rick Martinez arrived 30 seconds behind the paramedics. A former Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan, Martinez thought he'd seen everything. But the sight of Julia Banks's lifeless body wrapped in 18 feet of python made him take an involuntary step backward. How the hell do we get her out of there? He asked Crawford. The paramedic was already on the phone with Dr. Samuel Harrison at Tampa General's Poison Control Center, seeking advice. Doc, I've got an adult female, approximately 34 years old, currently wrapped by what looks like a massive python. Victim appears cyanotic, no visible respiration. How do I get this snake off her? Dr. Harrison's response was grim. If the snake is still constricting and the victim isn't breathing, you're likely dealing with a recovery, not a rescue. But if you're going to try, you need to work from the tail. Never attack the head. The snake will only grip tighter. And Lieutenant? Be very careful. A python that size could easily take a second victim. Animal Control Officer Patricia Vance arrived at 3:03 p.m., carrying specialized equipment including snake hooks, nets, and a CO2 fire extinguisher. Sometimes the sudden cold could startle a snake into releasing. She took one look through the window and shook her head. That's a Reddick. 18, maybe 20 feet. In full feeding mode. This is going to be dangerous. She turned to the growing crowd of first responders. I need everyone except essential personnel to clear out. Too many people will stress the animal and make this worse. Inside the enclosure, Medusa had begun the process of checking her grip, slightly loosening and retightening her coils to ensure her prey was truly dead. This gave Julia's body the illusion of movement, causing one of the younger EMTs to exclaim, "She moved. I saw her move." But Crawford, checking through binoculars, could see the truth. Julia's eyes were fixed and dilated, her skin a mottled purple-gray. The movement was just the snake adjusting. Julia Banks had been dead for several minutes. The team formed a rapid action plan. Vance would lead, using her expertise to try to remove the snake. Crawford and his partner, EMT Sarah Williams, would stand ready to begin resuscitation the moment Julia was free. Martinez and 2 other deputies would provide backup with catch poles and, if necessary, lethal force. The CO2 extinguisher was positioned by the door. Everyone understood the risks. A stressed reticulated python could strike with lightning speed, and her current position gave her excellent leverage. At 3:06 p.m., they made entry. Vance went first, snake hook extended, speaking in the calm, steady voice she used with dangerous animals. "Easy, girl. We're not here to hurt you." Medusa's head rose slightly, regarding the intruders with those unblinking amber eyes. Her tongue flicked rapidly, tasting the air now filled with the scent of fear and adrenaline. She made no move to release Julia, but neither did she display immediate aggression toward the rescue team. Crawford and Williams positioned themselves as close as they dared, medical equipment at the ready. Crawford could see Julia's face clearly now, and his heart sank. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, deep purple lividity, no chest movement whatsoever. But protocol demanded they try. "The second that snake is clear, we go in hot," he told Williams. "Full resuscitation protocol." Williams nodded, though both knew they were likely preparing to work on a corpse. Vance began the delicate process of trying to unwrap Medusa. She started where she could reach the tail, trying to locate the end of the snake's body in the complex knot of coils. "Martinez, I need you to be ready with that catch pole. When I get her to unwind, she might redirect toward us." The deputy positioned himself, hands steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. Behind them, more personnel gathered in the anteroom, watching through the window. The first coil came loose surprisingly easily. Medusa, perhaps sensing that her prey was no longer struggling, seemed less committed to maintaining her death grip. Vance worked methodically, using the hook to lift and guide each heavy loop of snake away from Julia's body. Python hissed occasionally but didn't strike. That's it, beautiful. Good girl. Let her go, Vance crooned, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. At 3:09 p.m., Fire Chief Robert Dalton arrived and immediately took command of the scene. Through the anteroom window, he could see Vance had managed to remove about half of Medusa's coils. Julia's torso was becoming visible, her Reptile Research Center t-shirt torn and bloodied, where the python's teeth had anchored. What's the victim's status? He asked Crawford over the radio. No signs of life, Chief. Been down at least 20 minutes. We're looking at a recovery operation. But they continued. The local news had already gotten wind of the story, someone had leaked it on social media. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotor noise audible even inside the building. Dalton posted deputies at all entrances to keep media out. The last thing they needed was footage of Julia's body on the evening news. He thought about her family, probably going about their day, unaware their world was about to shatter. Inside the enclosure, Vance had worked her way to the crucial middle coils around Julia's chest. These were tighter, compressed by the snake's killing instinct. Medusa grew more agitated as her prey was taken from her, her head weaving back and forth, mouth slightly open in threat. Display. Steady with that CO2, Vance called. If she strikes, hit her with a quick burst. Not too long, we don't want to hurt her. Even in this horrific moment, Vance maintained professional respect for the animal. Medusa was just being a snake, following instincts honed over millions of years. At 3:12 p.m., the last major coil came free. Julia's body was revealed in its entirety, and the damage was worse than expected. Her left shoulder and upper chest showed massive tissue damage from the initial bite, with clear puncture wounds still seeping blood. Her ribcage was visibly deformed, several ribs clearly broken. Most disturbing were the clear constriction marks, deep purple bands around her torso where Medusa's coils had squeezed the life from her. Move in. Move in. Crawford shouted, rushing forward as Vance used her hook to guide Medusa away from the body. The python, perhaps exhausted from her effort, allowed herself to be herded toward the far corner of the enclosure. Martinez kept his catch pole ready, but Medusa seemed more interested in retreating than attacking. She'd had her meal stolen, but python digestion is slow, she could afford to wait. Crawford and Williams descended on Julia's body with practiced efficiency. Williams immediately began chest compressions while Crawford intubated, though he could feel the resistance of damaged tissue. She's been down too long, Williams said between compressions. I know. Run the protocol, Crawford replied, injecting epinephrine directly into what he hoped was cardiac tissue. The portable EKG showed what they expected, flatline. No electrical activity whatsoever. For 20 minutes, they worked. They pushed drugs, delivered shocks, performed perfect CPR. Chief Dalton watched from the anteroom, occasionally glancing at Medusa, who had coiled herself in the corner, watching the humans work on her stolen prey. Animal control had set up a temporary barrier of catch poles and nets, ready to intervene if the snake moved toward the paramedics. But Medusa seemed content to wait and at 3:33 p.m., Crawford called it. Time of death, 15:33 hours. He sat back on his heels, exhausted and defeated. Williams began packing up their equipment, tears streaming down her face. She'd worked plenty of death scenes, but something about this one, the senselessness of it, the preventability, hit hard. Julia Banks had died doing what she loved, people would say. But looking at her mangled body, Williams couldn't see any love in it. Just tragedy. The scene shifted from rescue to recovery. The medical examiner was called, photographers began documenting the scene, and animal control prepared to remove Medusa. Vance approached the python with a mixture of professional respect and deep sadness. You're going to have to come with us, girl, she said. Medusa, perhaps sensing the change in atmosphere, allowed herself to be guided into a transport container with minimal resistance. She would spend the rest of her life in a secure facility, her days of being hand-fed by a loving owner over forever. Outside, the media circus was in full swing. Chief Dalton prepared a brief statement confirming a fatal animal attack but refusing to provide details. Julia's husband David had been notified and was on his way, driven by a sheriff's deputy because he was in no condition to drive himself. The staff, who had warned Julia, who had begged her to be careful, gathered in the break room, shock and guilt written on every face. Maria Gonzalez sat in the back of an ambulance, being treated for shock. She'd given her statement 3 times already but kept repeating, "I should have gone with her. She told me not to, but I should have gone anyway. I knew something was wrong. I knew it." The paramedic treating her, a young man who'd just started his career, didn't know what to say. What comfort could he offer? Julia Banks was dead, killed by an animal she'd raised from a baby, and nothing anyone said would change that fundamental, horrific fact. Julia Banks was pronounced dead at 3:33 p.m. on March 15, 2023, but the ripple effects of her death would spread far beyond that Florida. Afternoon. The Hernando County Medical Examiner, Dr. Patricia Hollingsworth, performed the autopsy the following morning. Her findings were grimly comprehensive. Cause of death was listed as mechanical asphyxiation secondary to constriction by a large python with contributing factors of massive blunt force trauma to the chest cavity and severe blood loss from multiple penetrating bite wounds. The clinical language couldn't capture the violence of Julia's final moments, but the photographs in the autopsy file told the story with brutal clarity. 7 ribs were fractured, with 2 completely separated from the sternum. Both lungs showed extensive hemorrhaging consistent with compression trauma. The bite wounds on Julia's left shoulder numbered 37 individual punctures, some penetrating nearly 2 inches into muscle tissue. But it was the pattern of bruising that was most telling, perfect spiral marks around her torso, each band darker than the last, showing how Medusa had systematically squeezed the life from her handler. Dr. Hollingsworth noted that unconsciousness would have occurred within 90 seconds, with brain death following at approximately 4 to 6 minutes. The victim likely experienced extreme panic and pain initially, but hypoxia would have quickly led to confusion and loss of consciousness, she wrote in her report. David Chen arrived at the Reptile Research Center at 4:47 p.m., driven by Deputy Martinez after receiving the devastating news at his architectural firm. Witnesses described him as completely shattered, stumbling from the patrol car and having to be physically supported by officers. It wasn't allowed to see Julia's body. It was still being processed as evidence, but he insisted on seeing Medusa. Against protocol, Chief Dalton allowed it, perhaps hoping it might provide some closure. The encounter was brief but haunting. David stood outside the temporary containment unit where Medusa had been secured, staring at the python who showed no recognition, no acknowledgement of the man who'd shared a home with her owner for 8 years. "Why?" David whispered, the question directed at no one, at everyone, at the universe itself. "She loved you. She loved you more than anything." Medusa's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, then she turned away, coiling into the corner of the container. David collapsed, sobbing, and had to be helped from the building. The investigation into Julia's death began immediately. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission took lead, with OSHA conducting a parallel workplace safety investigation. What they found was damning. The disabled safety alarms, the circumvented 2-person protocols, the ignored expert recommendations, it all painted a picture of a facility where passion had overruled prudence. Investigators discovered Julia's personal journal, filled with increasingly delusional entries about her spiritual connection with Medusa. The final entry, dated March 14th, read, "Tomorrow I'm going to try something special with Medusa. I want to see if she'll take food from my hand without the tongs. It's the ultimate trust exercise. I know she's ready. I can feel it." The decision regarding Medusa's fate sparked heated debate. Animal rights activists argued she was simply being a snake, following natural instincts, and shouldn't be punished for human error. Others, including several of Julia's colleagues, believed the python was too dangerous to ever be housed safely again. The final decision came from Dr. Harrison at the University of Florida. Medusa would be relocated to a secure research facility where she could live out her days contributing to scientific study but would never again have direct human contact. She was transported on March 18, spending the 12-hour journey in a specially designed steel container, monitored by 3 armed wildlife officers. Julia's funeral on March 22 drew hundreds of mourners from the herpetological community worldwide. The service was held at Brooksville Baptist Church. Though Julia hadn't been religious, it was the only venue large enough to accommodate the crowd. Her casket remained closed at the family's request. David delivered a eulogy that left few dry eyes, speaking of Julia's passion, her dedication to education, her belief that humans and dangerous animals could coexist peacefully. She died believing that, he said, his voice breaking. Right up to the end, she believed love could overcome instinct. She was wrong, but God, I loved her for believing it. The professional fallout was swift and severe. The Reptile Research Center's licenses were temporarily suspended pending investigation. Board members resigned immediately. The facility's insurance company launched their own investigation, ultimately denying the life insurance claim based on Julia's willful violation of safety protocols. David, already devastated by grief, now faced financial ruin. The facility Julia had built with such love and dedication closed permanently on April 1, 2023. The remaining animals were relocated to other institutions, their enclosures emptied. The building eventually sold to become a medical supply warehouse. The legal ramifications continued for months. OSHA fined the facility $180,000 for willful safety violations, though with the center closed, the fines would never be collected. Maria Gonzalez filed a workers' compensation claim for PTSD, which was approved after psychological evaluation confirmed she suffered severe trauma from witnessing the attack's aftermath. 3 former employees filed civil suits against Julia's estate, claiming they'd been subjected to unsafe working conditions. The lawsuits were eventually settled out of court, further draining what little resources remained. Public reaction was intense and divided. Social media exploded with debates about exotic animal ownership, with Julia's death becoming a flashpoint for broader discussions about human relationships with dangerous animals. Her YouTube channel, frozen at 52,000 subscribers, became a macabre destination for curiosity seekers. The final video, posted the morning of her death, showing her preparing Medusa's food while discussing the snake's mood, garnered over 10 million views. Comments ranged from sympathetic to cruel, with many pointing out warning signs visible in hindsight. The impact on exotic animal legislation was immediate. Florida State Representative Michelle Crawford introduced Julia's Law, requiring enhanced safety protocols for facilities housing large constrictors. The bill mandated minimum 2-person protocols for any interaction with snakes over 12 feet, automatic alarm systems that couldn't be disabled, and quarterly safety inspections. It passed unanimously, with Julia's mother Linda providing tearful testimony about her daughter's preventable death. Julia loved these animals, Linda told the legislature. The love isn't enough when you're dealing with apex predators. These new rules might save someone else's child. 6 months after Julia's death, a documentary crew arrived in Brooksville to film The Snake Charmer's Last Dance, a controversial examination of Julia's life and death. They interviewed dozens of people who knew her, from childhood friends to professional colleagues. The portrait that emerged was complex, a brilliant, passionate woman whose greatest strength became her fatal weakness. Dr. Webb, her old professor, provided perhaps the most insightful commentary. Julia represents a cautionary tale we see too often in this field. She anthropomorphized a predator, projected human emotions onto an animal incapable of returning them. In the end, Medusa was simply being a python. It was Julia who forgot that fundamental truth. David Chin participated reluctantly in the documentary, hoping to preserve some positive memory of his wife. He revealed that Julia had been planning to write another book, titled Beyond Fear, Living Harmoniously with Nature's Predators. The manuscript, found on her laptop, was only 3 chapters complete. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. David also shared home videos of Julia with Medusa in happier times, footage that was both beautiful and chilling when viewed with knowledge of how it would end. The documentary aired on National Geographic in December 2023 to massive ratings. It reignited debates about exotic animal ownership and the ethics of keeping large predators in captivity. Several facilities reported increased scrutiny and voluntary implementation of enhanced safety measures. The Association of Reptile Keepers issued new guidelines directly inspired by Julia's death, including mandatory psychological evaluations for handlers working with large constrictors and strict enforcement of buddy systems. 1 year after the attack, a small memorial was erected at the site of the former Reptile Research Center. A bronze plaque bore Julia's image and the inscription, Julia Banks 1988 to 2023. She loved without fear and died without malice. May her passion inspire us and her fate teach us. David Chen attended the dedication alone, placing a single rose at the base of the memorial. He'd moved to California, unable to remain in Florida, where every site reminded him of Julia. He'd started therapy to deal with survivor's guilt and PTSD, slowly rebuilding a life that would never be the same. Medusa adapted well to her new home at the University of Florida's Wildlife Research Station. She was housed in a state-of-the-art enclosure with no direct human contact, all feeding and maintenance done through specially designed ports. Researchers studied her behavior, contributing to understanding of python cognition and hunting patterns. She showed no signs of aggression beyond normal feeding responses, supporting the theory that her attack on Julia was simply opportunistic predation, not pathological behavior. She would live another estimated 15 to 20 years, a living reminder of the thin line between admiration and anthropomorphism. The Reptile Research Center building stood empty for months before its sale, becoming a destination for urban explorers and ghost hunters who claimed to hear strange sounds from Medusa's former enclosure. Security cameras caught teenagers breaking in to take selfies in the room where Julia died, leading to increased patrols and eventual boarding up of all windows. The new owners gutted the interior completely, but workers reported an unsettling atmosphere in what had been the snake wing. Some claimed to hear hissing in the walls, though inspectors found no evidence of any remaining animals. Linda Banks channeled her grief into advocacy, speaking at exotic animal facilities nationwide about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries with dangerous animals. She carried a photo of Julia, not with Medusa, but from her college graduation, full of hope and dreams. "My daughter died because she forgot that love and respect aren't the same thing," Linda would tell audiences. "You can love these animals, can dedicate your life to them, but the moment you forget what they are, the moment you think your bond transcends their nature, you're in mortal danger." Julia forgot. Please don't make her mistake. In the months following Julia Banks's death, the incident became a case study in exotic animal handling programs worldwide. Dr. Ricardo Morales, who had spent 40 years studying python behavior at the University of Miami, was commissioned by the Association of Zoological Professionals to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the attack. His 200-page report, published 8 months after the incident, became required reading for anyone working with large constrictors. The Banks case represents a perfect storm of human error, misplaced confidence, and predatory opportunism, Dr. Morales wrote in his introduction. Every element that could go wrong did go wrong, creating a tragedy that was as preventable as it was predictable. Dr. Morales's analysis of Medusa's behavior patterns in the months leading to the attack revealed classic signs of what he termed predatory drift. Using security footage, feeding records, and staff testimonies, he identified 17 distinct behavioral changes that indicated Medusa had begun viewing Julia as potential prey rather than as a caretaker. The increase in tongue flicking when Ms. Banks entered the enclosure rose by 340% between December 2022 and March 2023, he noted. This represents active chemical sampling, the snake gathering information about potential prey. The fact that this dramatic increase went unnoted or was dismissed as affection represents a catastrophic failure in behavioral assessment. The positioning behaviors Medusa displayed were particularly telling. Dr. Morales created a detailed timeline showing how the python increasingly oriented herself in ambush positions whenever Julia entered the enclosure. In early 2022, Medusa would typically remain in her hide or basking area during interactions. By February 2023, she was consistently positioning herself between Ms. Banks and the exit door in 78% of recorded images. This is textbook hunting behavior, cutting off escape routes, controlling the environment. Any experienced handler should have recognized this as extremely dangerous. Dr. Patricia Hemsworth, the python behavior expert who had warned Julia just weeks before her death, contributed her own analysis focused on size-related aggression in female reticulated pythons. Female retics undergo significant behavioral changes as they reach sexual maturity and maximum size, she explained in her contribution to the report. At 18 feet and 140 pounds, Medusa had reached the size where her species naturally preys upon mammals as large as sun bears and occasionally humans in their native habitat. The snake's instinctual programming doesn't distinguish between a wild pig in a Sumatran forest and a small human in a Florida enclosure. The medical analysis provided by Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency medicine physician who reviewed the autopsy findings, painted a grim picture of the biomechanics of constriction. The initial strike served two purposes, she explained. First, it anchored the snake's position, preventing the prey from escaping. The 37 puncture wounds created significant pain and shock, likely disorienting Ms. Banks and preventing effective resistance. Second, it positioned the snake's coils at optimal points for constriction, around the chest at the level of the lungs and heart. Dr. Chen's analysis of the constriction pattern revealed the terrifying efficiency of python predation. Each coil exerted approximately 90 psi of pressure. With 3 complete coils around the torso, Ms. Banks was experiencing roughly 270 psi of cumulative pressure, equivalent to having a small car parked on her chest. The human ribcage begins to deform at around 150 psi. Consciousness is lost within 60 to 90 seconds as blood flow to the brain is cut off. The victim experiences what we call compression asphyxia. The lungs cannot expand to draw breath, while simultaneously, venous return to the heart is compromised. Dr. James Morrison, the psychologist who had analyzed Julia's social media presence and journal entries, provided crucial insights into the human factors that contributed to the tragedy. Ms. Banks exhibited what I term expert's paradox, the false belief that extensive experience provides immunity from danger, he wrote. Combined with clear signs of anthropomorphic delusion, she created a narrative where Medusa was not just a snake but a friend, a companion, even a spiritual equal. This narrative became so powerful that it overrode basic self-preservation instincts and professional training. Morrison's analysis of Julia's journal entries revealed a troubling progression. Early entries from 2015 to 2018 showed appropriate professional respect for Medusa's nature. By 2020, language had shifted to describe the snake in human terms: moody, affectionate, jealous. By 2022, Julia was writing about conversations with Medusa and describing understanding in the snake's eyes. This represents a complete break from reality, Morrison noted. Ms. Banks had constructed an elaborate fantasy that placed her in mortal danger every time she entered that enclosure. The comparative analysis conducted by Dr. Robert Steinberg, who examined similar incidents over the past 50 years, placed Julia's death in sobering context. Of the 43 documented fatal constrictor attacks on handlers since 1970, 39 involved violation of basic safety protocols, he reported. In 35 cases, the handler was alone with the snake. In 31 cases, warning signs were documented but ignored. Ms. Banks's case hits every single risk factor we've identified. It's as if she was following a blueprint for how to be killed by a large python. Steinberg's research revealed that handlers who anthropomorphized their animals were 400% more likely to suffer serious injuries. The most dangerous handlers aren't the inexperienced ones, he explained. Novices are usually appropriately fearful. It's the experienced handlers who've begun to believe their own mythology who die. They've handled the animal successfully so many times that they forget each interaction is a roll of the dice. Julia Banks rolled those dice once too often. The legal analysis provided by attorney Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in exotic animal law, examined the liability implications of Julia's death. From a legal standpoint, Ms. Banks systematically dismantled every protection put in place for her safety, he stated. She disabled alarms, ignored written protocols she herself had established, dismissed expert warnings, and entered a dangerous animal's enclosure alone. In legal terms, she assumed extraordinary risk. While tragic, her death was the predictable result of her own deliberate choices. Rodriguez's analysis had implications beyond Julia's case. Facilities housing dangerous animals have both moral and legal obligations to enforce safety protocols, even when staff resist, he argued. The Reptile Research Center's board failed in their duty by allowing Ms. Banks to operate without oversight. Had they enforced their own rules, she would likely be alive today. This case will reshape how exotic animal facilities approach staff management and safety enforcement. Dr. Amanda Foster, the animal behaviorist who had evaluated Medusa just months before the attack, provided perhaps the most chilling analysis. Her review of video footage from the weeks before the attack showed clear predatory sequence behaviors that were missed or misinterpreted. The wild, reticulated pythons can go months without feeding, she explained. When they decide to take large prey, they exhibit specific preparatory behaviors. Medusa displayed every single one: increased alertness, strategic positioning, refusal of smaller prey items, and what we call testing strikes, quick movements toward the potential prey to gauge reaction. Foster's frame-by-frame analysis of the final attack was particularly revealing. The strike occurred at the exact moment Ms. Banks lowered her guard, literally and figuratively. She dropped the feeding tongs, removing the barrier between herself and the snake. Her body language shifted from alert to relaxed. Medusa had been waiting for this moment of vulnerability. The attack wasn't random or sudden from the snake's perspective. It was the culmination of weeks, possibly months, of evaluation and preparation. The consensus among experts was devastating in its clarity. Julia Banks's death was entirely preventable. Every expert interviewed agreed that proper adherence to established safety protocols would have prevented the tragedy. The two-person rule alone would have provided intervention capability. Proper use of barriers or hooks would have maintained safe distance. Recognition of warning signs would have led to modified handling procedures. Instead, a combination of hubris, delusion, and systematic safety violations created the perfect conditions for a fatal attack. Dr. Morales concluded his comprehensive report with a series of recommendations that would reshape exotic animal handling practices nationwide. These included mandatory psychological evaluations for handlers, strict enforcement of two-person protocols with automatic dismissal for violations, installation of tamper-proof alarm systems, and required continuing education on animal behavior. Julia Banks loved snakes, he wrote in his final paragraph. But love without respect for an animal's true nature is not love at all. It's dangerous delusion. Must serve as a permanent reminder that no amount of experience, affection, or imagined connection changes the fundamental fact: large constrictors are apex predators, and humans are prey-sized mammals. Forget this truth at your mortal peril. Julia Banks's tragedy teaches us that expertise without humility is a pathway to disaster. She possessed more knowledge about reptile behavior than most people accumulate in a lifetime, yet that very expertise became her downfall when she began believing it made her invincible. Her story serves as a stark reminder that in the world of dangerous animal handling, the moment you think you've mastered the risk is the moment you're most likely to become a statistic. The warning signs were there, written in a language every professional handler should understand. Medusa's increasingly predatory positioning, her refusal of normal prey, her intense focus on Julia during interactions, these weren't subtle hints but screaming alarms. Yet Julia, blinded by her emotional attachment and false confidence, interpreted danger signals as signs of affection. She looked at a 140-pound apex predator and saw a misunderstood pet. This fundamental misreading of reality cost her everything. Prevention starts with accepting a simple truth. Large constrictors are not pets, they're not friends, and they're certainly not capable of the emotional bonds Julia imagined. They are magnificent predators worthy of respect and admiration, but that admiration must always be tempered with appropriate fear. The two-person protocol exists because humans are fallible and snakes are opportunistic. The handling tools exist because distance saves lives. The safety alarms exist because emergencies unfold in seconds, not minutes. Julia's legacy lives on in the strengthened protocols her death inspired. Facilities across the nation now enforce the two-person rule with zero tolerance for violations. Psychological evaluations help identify handlers who may be developing dangerous attachments to their charges. Tamper-proof alarm systems ensure that no individual can disable safety measures in a moment of misguided confidence. These changes, born from tragedy, will save lives for generations to come. Her family continues to transform grief into purpose. Linda Banks travels tirelessly, speaking at facilities, universities, and conferences about the daughter she lost to misplaced trust. David Shin established the Julia Banks Memorial Fund, providing safety equipment to underfunded reptile facilities. Even Medusa, in her way, contributes to prevention. Her case study is required reading in herpetology programs worldwide. Permanent reminder of what happens when we forget that predators don't love us back. The impact on the exotic animal community has been profound and lasting. Handlers who once prided themselves on free-handling dangerous species now use tools and barriers. Facilities that operated on trust now enforce protocols with military precision. The cowboy culture that sometimes pervaded exotic animal handling has given way to a more professional, safety-first approach. Julia's death marked a turning point. End of an era where passion could override prudence. For those currently working with dangerous animals, Julia's story offers clear lessons. Never work alone with large constrictors. Always maintain barriers between yourself and the animal. Recognize that behavioral changes in predators often signal increased danger, not affection. Document and report concerning behaviors immediately. Remember that your expertise makes you knowledgeable, not invincible. Most importantly, never let emotional attachment cloud professional judgment. The psychological aspect of Julia's story deserves special attention. The tendency to anthropomorphize animals is natural and, with pets, often harmless. But with apex predators, this tendency becomes lethal. Every handler must constantly examine their emotional relationship with their charges. Are you seeing the animal as it truly is, or as you wish it to be? Are you interpreting behaviors through the lens of science or emotion? These questions, honestly answered, can mean the difference between life and death. Future handlers entering this field must understand that working with dangerous animals is not about conquering fear or proving bravery. It's about maintaining healthy respect for creatures that can kill you without malice or intention. It's about following protocols even when they feel unnecessary. It's about listening to colleagues who express concerns. It's about going home safely at the end of every shift, even if that means feeling overly cautious. The scientific community has embraced Julia's case as a teaching tool. Universities now include detailed analysis of the incident in their herpetology curricula. Students study the footage, read the reports, and discuss how they would have handled the escalating warning signs. Future professionals will enter the field with Julia's story etched in their minds, a cautionary tale that may save their lives decades from now. Technology has also evolved in response to tragedies like Julia's. New enclosure designs include emergency extraction systems that can separate handler from animal within seconds. Biometric monitors alert colleagues if a handler's vital signs indicate distress. Some facilities have implemented AI-powered behavior analysis that can identify predatory patterns before human handlers notice them. These innovations, while expensive, represent the future of safe exotic animal management. Looking back, it's tempting to demonize Medusa, to see her as a villain in this tragedy. But that would be missing the point entirely. Medusa was simply being a python, patient, opportunistic, following instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. She didn't betray Julia because snakes are incapable of loyalty. She didn't murder Julia because snakes don't commit murder. She simply did what pythons do when presented with warm, prey-sized objects. The tragedy lies not in Medusa's actions but in Julia's failure to remember this fundamental truth. For the general public, Julia's story carries its own lessons. The viral videos of handlers casually interacting with dangerous animals create false impressions of safety. Behind every seemingly calm interaction lies careful preparation, safety protocols, and yes, genuine danger. When you see someone free-handling a venomous snake or swimming with an anaconda, remember Julia Banks, an expert with years of experience who died because she believed her own hype. As we conclude Julia's story, it's important to remember her not just as a cautionary tale but as a complete person. She was a daughter who made her mother proud, a wife who was deeply loved, an educator who inspired thousands to appreciate reptiles. Her passion was genuine, her knowledge extensive, her intentions pure. She died doing what she loved, yes, but she died unnecessarily. That's the real tragedy, not that she loved dangerous animals, but that her love made her forget they were dangerous. The final lesson from Julia Banks's life and death is perhaps the most important. Respect and love are not the same thing. You can love pythons while respecting their nature. You can dedicate your life to their care while maintaining appropriate boundaries. You can advocate for their conservation while acknowledging their capacity for violence. Julia confused love with trust, respect with rapport. That confusion killed her as surely as Medusa's coils. If this story has gripped you, if Julia's tragedy has opened your eyes to the reality of working with dangerous animals, then share it. Share with anyone who works with exotic animals, anyone considering entering this field, anyone who thinks safety protocols are excessive. Julia Banks can't learn from her mistakes, but we can. We must. Because somewhere out there, another handler is disabling an alarm, entering an enclosure alone, mistaking a predator's patience for affection. Don't let Julia's death be in vain. Subscribe to this channel for more real-life animal encounters that educate and warn. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might save a life. Share this video with others who need to hear its message. Because the next time someone tells you they have a special bond with a dangerous animal, you might be the voice of reason that prevents another tragedy. Remember Julia Banks. Remember that love without respect is dangerous. Remember that no amount of experience makes you immune to nature's rules. And remember Medusa, not as a monster, but as a reminder that predators are what they are, regardless of how much we wish they were something else. Julia's story ends here, but its echoes continue. In every safety protocol followed, every two-person rule enforced, every handler who chooses caution over confidence, Julia's death saves lives. That's her true legacy, not the viral videos or the sensational headlines, but the quiet moments when someone remembers her story and makes the safe choice. Because in the end, that's all that stands between us and tragedy when working with nature's perfect predators. The choice to respect what they are, rather than believing in what we wish they could be.